H.R. 4330, the Protect Reporters from Exploitative State Spying Act, or the Press Act, would ensure that the press can engage in effective journalism while reducing the risk of putting themselves or their confidential sources, upon whom they often rely to bring critical stories to the public's attention, in legal jeopardy. Specifically, the Press Act would create a strong but qualified federal statutory privilege that protects journalists from being compelled by the federal government to reveal confidential sources and information. Additionally, the bill prohibits the federal government from compelling an electronic service provider that stores a journalist's information to disclose that information, as well as information relating to the journalist's personal account or technology device to the government.
We should all support this legislation and the important protections it provides for journalists. There's a reason why the founders chose to enshrine freedom of the press in the First Amendment to the Constitution. Liberty depends on freedom of the press, whether it's Tucker Carlson, James O'Keefe, Glenn Greenwald, Cheryl Atkinson, or Bob Woodward. Good reporters are those who are committed to holding the government accountable. Journalists are often the first to expose government abuses, waste, fraud, and encroachment on personal freedoms. And a critical aspect of freedom of the press is the pursuit of truth without government entanglements or intimidation. In fact, just last month, we learned that the Biden Justice Department targeted Project Veritas, a news organization specializing in undercover journalism. Project Veritas was subjected to an extensive investigation by the FBI, including having its emails seized on Microsoft servers. In a free country, we need to make sure that the government cannot unmask journalist sources without good cause. This bill provides those protections, and it is time we get this legislation signed into law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for championing this bipartisan legislation that is so vital to protecting the due process and privacy rights of all Americans. I'm thankful it was brought to today's markup because I don't think we should wait one more day to ensure these protections in light of reports we have seen in the last year. Under current law, prosecutors are allowed to subpoena a person's email and phone records, even if that person isn't suspected of any wrongdoing. Prosecutors can go straight to the person's service providers to obtain these records. And to make matters worse, the government can send gag orders with these subpoenas that prevent service providers from telling the targets, which can be journalists, government representatives, schools, companies, and countless others, that their information has been given over to the government. Everything is done in total secrecy, and the service providers can't do anything about it. Reports have showed that these gag orders are not only saved for the most serious of situations, but instead have been used routinely and are frequently rubber-stamped by courts with shockingly inadequate process and without necessary guardrails. This is not right.
I actually like the bill. I think it's a good bill. It's unfortunate that we need the bill. It really is. The only thing I'm trying to do is add one word on line 9, and also again in the second, page 3, line 5. You iterate, for instance, on a covered journalist, a whole series of activities that we would say a journalist who's engaged in these activities would be protected. I'm including the term investigates. The idea being that if you're investigating something, you may not have actually.
I like your amendment. I'm happy to accept it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Eskin.
The DOJ used secrecy orders against Project Veritas after a U.S. district judge rejected the DO's argument to ignore Project Veritas' journalistic privileges. The DOJ then went behind the judge's back to obtain an extension on 2 sealed non-disclosure orders from a magistrate judge to conceal the fact that they had already had unsupervised and unfettered access to privileged emails in contacts of 8 Project Veritas journalists. The bill reins in prosecutorial abuse and executive branch overreach by strengthening the standards prosecutors must meet when seeking to place NDOs on service providers. Instead of simply checking a box, prosecutors will now be required to show why there is a need for these orders. With the Biden administration's DOJ and our concerns about them targeting parents and expressing their concern with their children's curriculum, this is a necessary piece of legislation to enforce constitutional protections for Americans who face federal surveillance.
In June of last year, this committee held a hearing on the Department of Justice's use of court-ordered gag orders, or NDOs, when investigating leaks of classified information to journalists and media outlets. At that hearing, members of this committee heard testimony that the DOJ is not, in fact, using these NDOs in limited circumstances, but rather issuing thousands of these secrecy orders every year. Of course, if the government were to come to your home to search through your papers in your file cabinet, investigators must give you a copy of the search warrant. But when the government obtains a search order under the Stored Communications Act, they may not have to tell you they've requested access to your emails or other data. And further, under that same law, the government may obtain an NDO to prohibit providers like Apple, Microsoft, or Google from notifying you that investigators are searching through your cloud-based cabinets. So I'd like to thank the chair of this committee and the gentleman from Wisconsin for introducing this important bipartisan legislation that will make smart reforms to the NDO process and to end government abuse of these gag orders.
The question is on the motion to report the bill H.R. 7072 as amended favorably to the House. Those in favor respond by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes obviously have it.